Please don't cancel me. Welcome and welcome back, everybody. It's Tia here, and today's video is going to be talking about, there's no way to sugarcoat it, but 5 games that disappointed me. Before you fly down into the comments with fiery fingers, disclaimer, this video is about games that disappointed me. They might be good games, they might be great games, and honestly, it is not intended to put down any designers, any publishers, anybody who's worked on the game or is a fan of the game. I have mad respect for anybody who has the vision, the determination, the structure, and just overall being an amazing person to have an idea for a game and to see it through to publication. And to put a little bit of a positive spin on this video and make it helpful for you watching, I've decided to come up with an alternative list of games that are similar and accomplish a similar feeling. So if you are not a fan of these 5 games like I wasn't, here's a game you could try instead. Or if you love that game, hey, here's another game that you also might like. But without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at number 5 is a game that is very well loved, and you already know what it is because you probably saw it in the thumbnail, and that is Wingspan from Stonemaier Games. Now, again, disclaimer, this is not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. As you can see, it has an 8.1 rating. It's super well loved within the community, but for me personally, it wasn't quite my cup of tea. I understand why people love this game. Amazing production, great components. Who doesn't love engine building and birds? It's a refreshing theme to see in this kind of medium weight game. However, for me personally, the game is quite bloated. A lot of people boast about, oh, there are so many unique individual birds. And while the birds will have different nest sizes, different types of placements of where they will go, some of them have a lot of the same characteristics with just one thing changed. And so this game really, for me, felt quite bloated for an engine builder. I think it's a super solid concept. I love putting the birds in the grids. I loved collecting different eggs and choosing different foods from the feeder, but there were too many cards that did mostly the same. And the bottom lake row, I believe it is, of getting to pick more cards out of the deck to sift through and find the ones you really want, I felt to feel a little bit unfulfilling and maybe a little bit too lucky for my tastes because, again, there were so many cards. Now, there are expansions for like European birds and things like that, and I thought, great, this is a fantastic opportunity to just kind of tie everything together and clean it up by taking out some of those duplicates and adding in new birds, right? Wrong. Apparently, you just add them all in together, which just adds more bloat to a game that perhaps already could have done with a little bit of editing in terms of which birds you get. Now, to illustrate that fact in a more concrete way, the first time we played, I got a lot of those little tiny birds in my top row that catched wheat in order to score points. And while I wanted to try to explore other avenues, I found that they weren't as point efficient. And so what ended up happening was I just had a bunch of these birds catching wheat. I was doing the same action again and again because that part of my engine was built up the most efficiently, doubled down with the cards that were on it, and ended up winning, but it wasn't super satisfying. And lo and behold, the next 2 times I played the game, I steered clear of that strategy and tried to stay away from it, but 2 other people found the same strategy. Now, this could be like a small, weird off chance that this happened, but I think in order for a game to really shine and to really be exemplary, the best way to win should be fun. It shouldn't feel repetitive or like you're breaking the game in some way. And so this one just didn't quite do it for me, although there are some very solid elements that I really wanted to enjoy. Now, as an alternative, I do have not just 1, but 2, but 3 other little engine building games that you may enjoy if you like Wingspan, or if you were looking for something a little cleaner like I was. The first of which is Fantastic Factories. If you like die rolling, if you like getting cards to build an engine, this is a really great one that's straight to the point. It's got a very vibrant theme and is just overall a blast, especially with the newest 2 expansions that were released. Another quick and to the point engine builder that just came off recently is Furnace. Now, this one might be hard to find at this particular time, but again, it has a bidding mechanic, which adds something a little unique to an engine builder. And the actual cards themselves are cool because even if you miss out on a bid for a card and winning it and adding it to your engine, you still get a conversion from the top of the card, which I think is really fantastic. And it plays in just 4 short rounds. Another game that is one of my favorite all-time games and one of my favorite engine builders is Res Arcana. And this may be the culprit for why I didn't enjoy Wingspan as much, because we got a hold of copies of these games within the same week. And Res Arcana does similar things of building a tableau of cards, such as you would do in Wingspan, but your deck is only 8 cards total. That's it. You can get other monuments, places of power, and items to help you along, but there's so much depth with just those 8 cards in your deck. It's mind-blowing to me how streamlined this design is. So again, although Wingspan is a great game, it didn't quite do it for me. My recommendations would be to definitely check out Fantastic Factories, Furnace, or Res Arcana if you're looking for something similar, but maybe a little bit more to the point. The next game on this list isn't necessarily a full game. It's actually a game expansion for a game that I love, and that is Castles of Mad King Ludwig, the Secrets expansion. Now, this expansion adds 3 new little modules, one of which was okay, and 2 of which I pretty much hated. So, in case you're not familiar with Castles of Mad King Ludwig, you are going to be bidding on tiles with almost an I cut you choose, as one person is the master builder, setting prices for different tiles that will gain you bonuses and score you points based on adjacency, based on area, based on where they are constructed in your castle. This game is really thinky. It's really interactive, trying to see what everybody else is doing. It's one that feels flavorful because you're creating this mad castle with all of these passages that don't make sense. And I love the base game. However, the expansion, like I said, adds 3 modules, one of which are the swans. So particular tiles will have an element of a swan, which you draw randomly from a bag, and it's set collection. It's so random for a game that is so highly strategic, where everything is planned out. It really threw me off. And the next module, the moat, which you see pictured here, confines the chaos that is your castle. While it's really cool to think about how can I maximize my placement in a smaller space, it felt very restrictive and not in a very exciting way for me personally. I felt like one of the cool things about this game was that you would end up with this ridiculous castle at the end, not necessarily something that fit into a small square of a box. So that was really crushing. Now, the other little part of this expansion are secret passageways, which you have, I believe, 3 of that have a 2x multiplier for the rooms that are adjacent to them. Is that necessary? If you are looking for a game that has high strategy, that has some resource management in it with its money and has a puzzly aspect, I would really recommend checking out the original Castles of Mad King Ludwig, just as it is. I don't necessarily think you need the expansion for this one, although some of those elements may appeal to you. But that is my 4th pick for this list, the Castles of Mad King Ludwig expansion, Secrets. My number 3 pick for this list is one that, oh man, I don't know. I really wanted to like it. I'm a high fantasy junkie, but sorry to say, Descent 2nd Edition did not do it for me. And to be fair, personal taste, there are a couple things going into it that pretty much dictated that this would not be staying on my shelf for long. For one, it's a campaign style game that is very long, very story driven. I personally have a hard time scheduling that, finding time for it, finding energy, finding the motivation to keep playing a game back to back to back to back multiple times that is already long in length per section. And secondly, the fact that it is a one versus all. Now, 2nd edition did come with an app that would control the overlord, and then you could play it cooperatively with friends. So I was excited about this prospect and excited to get into something a little chunkier. Obviously, it being a 2nd edition, there was already a lot of content out for it and the mechanics were well run through, but I felt this one to be quite lacking. Even though I love the universe, I love the art, I love the minis, it just felt kind of to be what you would expect. And the app integration really pulled me out of the immersion. So I personally felt that the best way to play this game would be one versus all, which isn't something I'm super into. So this one ended up being a pass for me. Now, if you love dungeon crawlers, but maybe like me, your attention span isn't the best, or you don't have a group to play it regularly with, one of the games that I personally really enjoy, although it may be hard to find, sorry, is Runebound. This is the 3rd edition from Fantasy Flight Games, and these give you an entire scenario and story within one playthrough. There are some extra expansions where you can play cooperatively or where you can have a little bit more of a campaign. So it's very versatile in this way. It can be semi-cooperative, it can be very competitive based on your play group, or you could just work together. If you have the Unbreakable Bonds expansion, this one for me does everything that I want a larger dungeon crawler miniatures game like Descent to do, but in a smaller, shorter package. If you do really like campaign games and things like that, I will say that although I'm not a fan of legacy games, Gloomhaven had some really interesting mechanics with the card play in it. And I think is the reason why I ended up playing more of Gloomhaven is because it didn't need an app to play fully cooperatively, and I found the mechanics of card playing and upgrading your cards themselves to be a little bit more intriguing than just the die rolling that happens in Descent. Now, there is a 3rd edition of Descent that was released recent to this video coming out. I've heard a lot of good things about it. For me personally, I don't know whether I'll delve into it, but that may be another alternative if you enjoy dungeon crawlers. So I would definitely check out some other opinions on that newer edition. Unfortunately, I don't have experience with it, but that is my number 3 disappointing gaming experience, and that was with Descent 2nd edition. Getting down to it, my number 2 pick is another cooperative game that had such high praise when it came out, and it is also a game that had app assistance, and that is Rising 5 Runes of Asteros. I really enjoyed the theme, the art from Vincent Dutrait, the cooperative nature of the game. It looked great, it sounded great, it plays off of kind of this mastermind vibe where you're trying to locate and line up the pieces. There are different things you can mitigate. Each character has a unique ability. These are all things that sounded very promising, and the praise again for this game when it first came out was so high. My expectations were through the moon. This game for me was a dud. The decks were very limited. The character powers and interactions of buddying up didn't feel quite as satisfying, and it just felt like it was a great starting point, but that there was a little bit more that needed to be had. And not to mention, Gary Kim is an amazing designer. I love so many of his titles. Choreo is the game that got me into the hobby, and so seeing his name on the box, along with all this praise and everything, I think I probably just had more expectations for what this game set out to be. And with the app and having that mastermind vibe, another alternative was to have one player set the pattern and just be there to check yes or no, does it match, how many match. To me, the idea of making someone sit there the entire time just to check your 4 different symbols and say whether they're good or not, that was a fail. And the app was very basic in that that's what it did. That was its function. And it kind of took me out of the game to have to line it up and scan it and have everything working. I don't know. I really wanted to love this game, but it felt quite light and a little bit like maybe if there was an expansion to really flesh it out, it would bring new life to this game, but to my knowledge, there isn't and there hasn't been, maybe because there were quite a few people like me who were disappointed about Rising 5. Now, an alternative to this game, if you're looking for something where you have a really great world with amazing art and unique character powers managing different aspects on the board, I would definitely look into Dead Men Tell No Tales by Kane Klenko. This has all of those elements, but as pirates on a ship, fighting undead skeletons, looting treasure. I think the combat is a little bit more satisfying than it was in Rising 5. And instead of figuring out a puzzle, you're trying to get to different parts of the ship to build out your ship, as well as managing all of the negative things that are coming out. So this is a really great immersive game if you were looking for something that was just a little more engaging in terms of the gameplay and what the different aspects are that you're managing. I would definitely check out Dead Men Tell No Tales, but unfortunately my number 2 pick, Rising 5, didn't quite get there for me. And last but not least, this one hits hard because it was a recent disappointment, and it was a game that I was so sure that I was going to love that I backed it on Kickstarter right away based on previous experience with the former game in the series, and that, I'm sad to say, is Deep Space D6 Armada. This game builds off of the original solo game, Deep Space D6, and expands it out to a 4-player cooperative game where you're going to be navigating a ship. You're going to upgrade it. You're also going to get crew members, which will give you special abilities, rolling dice to complete missions and fight enemies. The original Deep Space D6 was an instant favorite for me. And so when this game was announced, Armada, to where you could play it solo or with more people, and there were a little more things going on, I thought, this is amazing. I love it. Not to mention the art from Gareth Davies. I mean, just look at it. It's so gorgeous. How can you not be in love with this game from first glance and from previous knowledge if you play Deep Space D6? Now, unfortunately, I think this game suffered from biting off more than we could chew. It did tend to be quite fiddly. And not only that, but there were so many misprints, which isn't the end of the world, but on my first playthrough, one of the misprints was on the player card of how many enemy ships spawn. And it felt like I was just doing the same thing over and over and over again without making any progress, because in order to complete the final mission, you have to collect 4 data chips out of a deck of almost 100 cards. And it's completely random which one flips up each time. Now, there have been some suggestions on how to fix this, only getting 2 data cards or just drawing 2 and keeping 1 based on a priority list, but it just feels like that's something that could have been and should have been resolved a little bit more gracefully. It doesn't really have a satisfying game arc when your progression in the game is just holding out until something randomly appears. Whether it takes a long time or a medium time or a short time, doesn't really matter, because as a player, you don't really feel like you're adding to that progression. And not to mention, it was kind of similar with the ship upgrades as well, where you're just randomly drawing from a bag and then choosing the ones you want to keep. The rest go back into the bag. There's no marketplace. There's no foresight into what you might be getting into when you choose to take that action. And I don't know, it just felt like there were a lot of elements that could have been really great, but that weren't fully thought out. The mission resolution was amazing. I wish there would have been more die mitigation in the actual combat itself that matched that, other than maybe you get a ship upgrade that lets you reroll or that lets you utilize more dice. It suffered from the same thing that I think Wingspan suffered from, for me, my 5th pick, which is that in order to get the things you want, you just have to do more and search and hope that you get lucky to get those elements that will really help you to build up a successful engine or a successful ship to go out in combat and fight missions. So it was very disappointing. I wanted to love it. I really, really did. And the art is so amazing. But if that sounds interesting to you, then I would definitely check out the original Deep Space D6, even though it's only a solo game. It's a really solid, fun little solo game, and it uses some of the elements that were in Armada, but more concise, more streamlined, and I only wish that there could have been more of this in Deep Space D6 Armada, or even just a reprint of this with Gareth Davies' art would have been fantastic. But unfortunately, Armada for me was very, very disappointing. So there you have it. Those are 5 board games that, for me personally, were a disappointment. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with any of my observations, or if there have been games that were disappointing for you as well. One of the great things about the hobby is it's an ever-growing market with so many new designers and so many new ideas, but part of that is going to be that there are going to be some games that don't live up to expectations, or there will be other games that come out either before or after the fact that really exceed your expectations and make some great games feel maybe just a little bit lackluster. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe down below. You can also click the like button if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful. That being said, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye. Yeah, I swear to God, you've lost your mind hating on a game.